Welcome, Tobias. Thank you. So, thanks everyone. I'm going to start with a simple statement. Here we go. And this simple statement is that oxygen is required for life. And we practically know this because we all use oxygen in the air when we breathe. And we use that oxygen also for energy production. But there's a flip side to the coin of using oxygen for energy production. And that flip side and the downside is that we'll also generate so-called free radicals or reactive oxygen species. And if there's an abundance of these reactive oxygen species and free radicals, that will actually elicit a lot of damage to the bodies, to the organs, tissues, and cells. And this is illustrated on this specific slide. To the left, you have a nicely cut, fresh apple that looks good. Once it is exposed to oxygen, it's then converted to a brown, rotten, and definitely less appealing version of the apple. So, oxidative stress. There's a number of different conditions that causes oxidative stress, and A1M Pharma has a particular interest in the kidney because we know that the kidneys are extremely sensitive to oxidative stress. And of course, acute kidney injury, it's not a single disease entity, but there's a lot of different clinical conditions that may cause acute kidney injury, and I've listed the most common here. So, for example, surgical procedures, and I will come to that in a minute. Large surgical procedures can cause damage to the kidneys. We know that many medications, such as chemotherapy, also antibiotics, has direct toxic effects to the kidney. Organ transplantation, and we know that kidney transplantation is very common. There's a huge sort of damage to the organ once you transplant that into the body, simply because of oxidative stress. We also know that infections, large infections, severe infections, and sepsis also can cause acute kidney injury. And one of the major focus for A1M Pharma, as I will come to, is actually to reduce the damaging effects of oxidative stress. Looking at acute kidney injury, we know by epidemiology that there's roughly about 13 million people annually that is affected by some sort of acute kidney injury. This is also associated with very high morbidity and mortality. In severe cases, we need to provide life-supporting dialysis treatment. This can be intermittent, but it could also be a chronic treatment if there is an irreversible and severe damage to the kidney. And subsequently, we also know that these patients usually have a very poor quality of life, especially if they progress into a chronic kidney disease. Importantly, there's no specific treatments for acute kidney injury. So medically we can provide supportive treatment, such as fluid management. We discontinue drugs that is directly toxic to the kidney, but we don't have any drugs that actually address the issue that causes the damage, such as oxidative stress. So I should say a few words about myself, because I very recently joined A1M Pharma. I started from December 1st, and I was appointed then as the Chief Medical Officer. And as already mentioned, mid-January I was appointed as CEO for this company. I have a medical background, so I'm a board-certified specialist, both in internal medicine and nephrology, but I'm also a researcher, and I've performed a lot of basic research and also clinical research. Over the last years, I had a full-time position in industry, so I worked at a company called Astellas. My base was in the Netherlands, and I worked in the global development team. And actually in the therapeutic area that also included nephrology, which is highly relevant, of course, for A1M Pharma. So as you've seen, there's a lot of potentially different patients you could treat if you want to block oxidative stress, which we do with our candidate, which I will come to in a minute. We initially specifically focus on patient group with AKI that is related to cardiac surgery. And there's a good reason for that. So first of all, we think that this mechanism of our lead asset is highly, highly relevant for this patient population. But also we see a lot of development advantages and opportunities here. So I've listed them. So for example, we know that the patients are readily identifiable. There's a lot of patients. We know where to find them at the major university clinics where cardiac surgery is being performed. There's also short treatment duration, which is an advantage for us here, which means we know that essentially everyone who develops acute kidney injury after cardiac surgery, you can see that within 2 to 3 days. That also means that you have a quick readout of your study results, and the treatment duration is usually 1 to 2, maximum 3 days. Another benefit is also that the clinical endpoints that we're looking both in early development and for making decisions about the project in proof of concept studies, but also in later pivotal studies. We know that the clinical endpoints are relatively well defined. We know what to look for to make decisions about the project and also what it takes to actually register the drug. So overall, we find this an attractive indication for clinical development. Going to the lead asset of the compound, termed ROSgard, and as you can hear from the name, ROS stands for reactive oxygen species, and we want to guard against that. So this is a recombinant variant of an endogenous protein called alpha-1 microglobulin. And A1M has many different functions, and I've listed the main key functions here. So the first one, it actually binds and scavenges directly free radicals, what I mentioned, the reactive oxygen species, but also other components of that. As a consequence, it also has a direct repair mechanism on damaged tissue. We also know that this A1M actually goes into the cell, binds specifically to the mitochondria, so it gives a mitochondrial protection. And this is a very important element in not only acute kidney injuries, but also in chronic kidney injuries, where we see mitochondrial dysfunction as a key element of the pathogenesis of these disorders. So the concept is that we will utilize the endogenous protein, but we will give that in pharmacological amounts at certain conditions where this is insufficient to actually protect against oxidative stress. So I'm going to give you a very simplistic model in patients with cardiac surgery, why we hypothesize that this drug would actually work. So there are two things. So the first one, when you use a heart-lung machine in cardiac surgery, we have something called hemolysis, which is the destruction of red blood cells. And that releases many different things, but one thing that's released is called heme, which has a direct toxicity to the kidney and also oxidizing properties. We also know that during this procedure, in conjunction with the use of a heart-lung machine, but also during the surgery itself, we have repeated small events of ischemia and hypoxia leading to increased oxidative stress. So this means that we can measure this systemically, but also you precipitate this vicious circle within the kidney where you have increased oxidative stress that leads to an inflammatory process that feeds back and also increases the oxidative stress. And ultimately, the outcome may actually be acute kidney injury for a lot of these patients. So ROSgard actually prevents both at the systemic level by direct scavenging of heme and some of the oxidizing properties in the plasma. But also we know that it's filtered in the glomeruli and it homes into the kidney. So when we give this as an infusion, all ROSgard will essentially accumulate in the kidney, which is the place we want to protect. So that's another benefit. So I won't give you a lot of details and show the data, but I will give you a summary of where we are with this lead asset that we are intending to bring into the phase 1 very soon. So we have a very robust preclinical pharmacology package. So we've shown in multiple different models, not only related to acute kidney injury, but also other models, where we have good impact on reducing mortality. We have reduction of biomarkers that are linked to acute kidney injury. We do see an improved renal function as measured by the filtration rates. If we look histologically, we have a reduced tissue damage. We have reduced proteinuria also in a lot of these animal models. And that is important because all these markers are actually used clinically, and we know we can register drugs based on these for primary endpoints in pivotal trials. In general, we have, in November 2018, it was communicated that we received regulatory approval to initiate a phase 1 study. This was approved by the MPA because the study will be conducted in Sweden. This also means we have a well-documented preclinical safety profile. We also established quite recently a large-scale industrial production according to GMP standards of ROSgard. This will be used as an intravenous infusion. So essentially, these are intensive care unit patients. So this is an IV infusion. We also have a solid IP protection, both in terms of the medical use and the indications we can operate with recombinant A1M, but also, of course, a matter of composition patent. So overall, I think this is a solid platform to initiate clinical development with this first asset that the company will bring forward. So a few words about the path forward over the next years. So very soon we expect to initiate the phase 1 study, and this is a pretty classical approach to phase 1. This will be conducted in healthy individuals, healthy volunteers. We will start with the first part, which is called a single ascending dose, meaning that you give a small group of healthy volunteers a low dose to start with. If that is safe and well tolerated, then you increase the dose and you go to the next dose level until you reach a predefined exposure cap. So the results will be communicated, or is expected to be communicated, approximately 6 months after the first patient's in. We also plan to initiate the second part of the first-in-human study, which is a multiple ascending dose that follows the same principle, but you give multiple repeated dosing for several consecutive days. We also plan to perform some additional activities within production for drug substance and also do some formulation work around the drug product. In 2020, we expect results also from the second part of the first-in-human study, the multiple ascending dose part. We also will initiate a small phase 1b study, which primarily will be a safety study in patients that undergoes cardiac surgery. And that is just to prove the concept that the drug is safe and well tolerated also in these patients. And again, results are expected roughly within 6 months after the treatment start. And further on, we plan to initiate a larger phase 2 study, an effect study in the patients undergoing cardiac surgery. So overall, I think A1M Pharma is prepared. I have a limited time in the company, but I think during that time we've strengthened the competence, especially with expertise in drug development, not only on the medical end, but also on the CMC end. We identified a very attractive initial indication for clinical development with a lot of advantages. We have a well-defined clinical development plan. Of course, this is an early clinical development plan, but also a good tentative development plan, what it looks like in late phase. We also secured funding for the upcoming phase 1 study that I will come to. So again, the initial phase 1 results is hopefully to be communicated roughly 6 months after study start, and we expect that to happen towards the very end of the first quarter this year, so quite soon. And my final slide is just to demonstrate that we have a 100% secured rights issue going on right now in February 2019. I will not give you all the details about this, but there's a prospectus available. You can find it on the homepage. The amounts of issuing is around 70 million Swedish crowns, and that will definitely bring us minimum into January 2020 to support all these activities that I mentioned. The timelines for the secured rights issue it's already started. The prospectus has been published, and the subscription period is ending February 20, which is Wednesday next week. So if you do have an interest in this, please look at the website, look at the prospectus, and see if you find this interesting. And the outcome of this activity will be published roughly around February 26. So I think I will close with that. Thank you again, and I will take any questions.
Thank you, Tobias. I would like to start with a question of my own. Having worked you were at Astellas, which is a global pharma company. What attracted you to come to a small biotech a small biotech like A1M Pharma?
Yeah, so that was a conscious decision. I mean, I've been working now over the last 6-7 years in a larger pharmaceutical company. Obviously, that has advantages in terms of especially funding, because once you have a strategy, you define the project, and you have support, and you can actually execute without search for additional funding continuously. On the other hand, I think there's a lot of similarities, because if you go to a small company, then you still have a project, and you need to develop that project, and you would mentally and clinically and think about it at the same way as you would do in a big company. So, and I think that's also a quick way to make decisions. You have more flexibility because there's not a large organization. There's no other competing projects. So I think there's also some benefits to that, and, which I appreciate.
And using your previous experience then in clinical development and so on, what do you see as the biggest advantages with the choice of indication that A1M Pharma has now with it?
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, this is a biologic, so we're still working on the ultimate formulation, but of course, there's a relative high cost at this time for production. So having an indication where you can give a short-term treatment, we have, as I've shown, it's only a few days treatment that we expect. You have a quick readout of the study results. And we think really based on the biology that the mode of action is really close to perfect. So I think with that, that really justifies the selection of the primary indication we have now.
And patient recruitment, so on, that would not be a problem in this kind of indication? No,
so we have very good industry benchmarks of what would be the expected recruitment. So again, we know where to find the patients. There's a lot of patients that undergoes cardiac surgery. It's all done at the major clinics. So of course, depending on your final inclusion-exclusion criteria, there might be some variability, but we have a very good understanding of the recruitment pace, which shouldn't cause any problems in terms of delivering patients into the trials.
And thinking about problems and risk mitigation, what are the main, or what's the main challenge that you perceive at this point?
No, so I think the main challenge now is that we simply just need to go into the phase 1 study and start that as soon as possible. I think all the investors and everyone is really waiting for that, and also everyone in the company. So just starting phase 1 and get the first clinical data, I think that would be very exciting with this molecule.
See what it can do.
See what it can do.
Given the history of ROSgardin, which has been considered for a number of indications earlier, if given that you execute this plan within this indication, how do you look at the possibilities of actually then label widening or going into other indications later?
No, so as I've shown, I think the biology around A1M is extremely interesting, and I think the potential number of indications that could be envisioned based on this concept, it's quite large. And accordingly, I mean, the company has in the past, before my time, performed a lot of different pharmacology studies, not only in kidney injuries, but also in other indications, such as preeclampsia. And I think they've all consistently demonstrated a good pharmacological effect. And for me, that typically means that if you can repeat that effect in so many different types of models, that actually indicates that it probably has some good pharmacology effects. So I think there's a good opportunity for expanding, but now this company needs to focus and we need to execute. And I think this is really an ideal indication for demonstrating a proof of concept. If we're successful, then we can envision both in terms of other subgroups of acute kidney injuries, but also potentially other indications where we have organ damage due to oxidative stress.
And like you said, funding is always an issue, especially in small companies. You're now doing a financing round, fully guaranteed, which is good. You know you're going to have the funds to start and to execute. You attracted some interesting guarantors. Max Mitteregger has a specialty investor here in Sweden, quite famous. That's one. The subscription period starts at, you said next week, was that?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Good to know. for everyone here can, of course, grab you in the short break that we have and ask questions. And I know that you also brought some material to give out. Yeah. Thank you very much, Tobias, for an interesting presentation.
Okay, thank you.